Nietzsche is very concerned with his 1001 Zila or goal, and Heidegger is concerned with the steadfast resolution. So maybe there's not as great a war here on every point as we might think. But let's see what we can do for ourselves out of this dust up. So Nietzsche periodically speaks of his like of the unpretentious truth. So I think, and in this essay, he says, I regard this as true but deadly. So he speaks of the truth and of the unpretentious, and this is as it were, an unpretentious truth in the sense I was saying before of evolution. He speaks of the sovereignty of becoming. Which basically means evolution. If we take evolution in the vernacular sense, not in the scientific sense, just that there is evolution, not that we know in a scientific way the specifics of the mechanisms and so forth. Taken in this way, Nietzsche builds a kind of ground out of which all his other considerations can build up. We have everything's changing, there's evolution, but surrounding that there's a certain sense of science or religion of the eternal necessities, as it were, the things. And Heidegger admits in some way an importance of the science or religion to man. Man is verrückt and is crazy, as he says in the nice little interview with the Buddhist monk that you can see on YouTube. So Nietzsche's concern with life springs out of this ground where he's saying, where we're looking at this falling apart, the great immediacy of the problem of the evolution is that we lose what Nietzsche says in this essay is the cardinal differences between man and animal, and you can extend that to say between mineral and the gods, as it were. The gods could be the statement and a rational statement, understanding of the moral aims of our, the way to morally point our will to decide on actions, and it could also mean the necessary laws of everything, of the way things happen in the world. Heidegger raises this problem. He says our worldview, and this kind of ties to personality, our personality, worldview, this kind of thing, always colors our science. And you can see that in any scientific pursuit, you have to choose which direction you want to go and what kind of experiments you want to run, what kind of problems you want to solve, and so on. So it always comes in just in a simple fashion. Let's try to give, that's what Nietzsche has to say about the unpretentious truth. What does Heidegger say? Heidegger says here in these 38, 39 remarks on Nietzsche that when we're thinking about a great thinker, we should go away from all the accidental things and go towards not the essence of Nietzsche per se, but rather the standard is that which was in Nietzsche, which is now still holding sway in the world essence. So when we're going to this Saka, as it were, what we're going to is what still speaks to us from that thinker. And I think of it in terms of like we're a free solo climber on a rock face, and what the thinker does is he spots out a way to go, and that way to go may now just appear, as it were. Now it's there, and in some way we're all seeing things that way. And maybe you can remove the distinction between seeming and really being in this case. It's no longer cogent. But so Heidegger wants to go to what in the thinker is giving us the footholds and the handholds that we're absolutely taking for granted, as it were, and to come to see what's happening there. The other way to look at that would be more prolonged, and if you start from the beginning of the way Heidegger thinks about the history of the West, is that initially we're taking for granted that there's an awareness, which is, as it were, ourselves or our thinking, and that's contrasted with all the things we come across: the shoe, the moon, the sky, some ideas or whatnot, and then the being of beings, which is not the same as what Heidegger, the being Frage, as it were. The being of beings would then be this answer of what is all this stuff, as Daniel Dennett calls it, stuff. You have these different answers that, Heraclitus speaks of fire. What are all these beings? But in that sense, being is being as available to our attention, as it were, our thinking. There's a gap. That's being as availability, and you can speak of, when you speak of being as the being of beings, in that sense, you're speaking in metaphysical terms, and the most familiar to us is the materialism, is the everything is one stuff, as Dennett puts it, and then you have this little sort of leftover, the concept of consciousness, which, by the way, there's a good essay by William James where he says something about the move from the soul concept, the Greek tripartite psychology, to the sort of empty consciousness concept that we now hear about all the time in the zombie problem and things like that. So it's not clear whether we're ourselves, or whether Nietzsche is doing metaphysics, or whether we can genuinely come into Heidegger's thinking. Maybe we're just treating Heidegger as one more thing alongside others. And Heidegger says here, with respect to the anti-Platonism, he speaks of this question of the plant raising up towards the sun, and he says this is. He draws analogy to the human, the Nietzsche's thinking here on life as like reaching towards the forms. So there's we mentioned something of what that means. The form is just any style of life, as it were, any the architecture of Zaha Hadid, or the current art world practices, or in a larger scale, all the ideologies, the progressivism, as it were, liberalism, the forms of life, the democratic spirit. Nietzsche speaks here of the egotism of the coming into the modern period. If you think of Hobbes' flip over to the ground of relying on the general egotism of man, and the low qualities man will defend his life. Man has this Hobbes thinks you can rely on that instinct, and so on. So let's go forward in that light and try to go more to the specific these double texts here, also considering that we don't know where we are in time, because we're in these other times and we don't know how so far, but we have some guidance in that we want to grasp out of them what's still essencing or calling us now.